to another episode of Justice for All Now. I'm your host, Hena Zuberi. Even during this pandemic, halal grocery stores around the country are reveling in the midst of Ramadan, buying frenzy. It's a concern that many Muslims are concerned about the origins of the Ramadan dates that are carried in these stores. In about 2014, I myself wrote an article about this when I noticed that there were Jordan Valley dates being sold in local halal grocery stores, which are from Israel. So after the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel captured the Jordan Valley from Jordan, tracts of the land were taken from Palestinian farmers and allocated to settlements and military camps. According to Interpress Agency report, the Jordan Valley holds 28.3% of the West Bank's land and is the largest single Palestinian territory under full Israeli military and administrative rule, classified as Area C since the 1990s. Only 13% of the valley is under Palestinian rule, known as Area A. In 2005, Palestine civil society issued a call for a campaign of boycotts, divestment, and sanctions called BDS against Israel until it complies with international law and Palestinian rights. So today I am very, very grateful to have with us an awesome activist who I've known for a while. His name is Tahir Hazrullah, and he's the Outreach and Community Organizing Director for American Muslims for Palestine. Tahir also coordinates AMP's grassroots organizing and helps facilitate national coalition building, and is currently working to develop AMP chapters throughout the country. He's also one of the Irvine 11. So this is a California tie that we both have. The Irvine 11 were a group of students who were arrested and prosecuted for expressing their constitutionally protected rights of free speech and political dissent when they walked out from a speech given by the Israeli ambassador Michael Oren at the UC Irvine in 2010. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Tahir.
Thank you so much for having me. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak to you and your audience.
Alhamdulillah, Ramadan Mubarak to you as well. And while we're having this conversation, Twitter is trending with there are many hashtags on boycott Israel, boycott Ramadan dates. And you yourself had a piece published in Al Jazeera on this campaign. So tell us more about the boycott Ramadan dates from Israel campaign. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So in 2012, actually, is when the AMP initiated this campaign to boycott Israeli dates. We realized that the number 2 exporter of dates to the United States was Israel after Tunisia. And we needed to send a strong signal that our community, the largest consumer of dates, particularly in the month of Ramadan, would be taking a strong position against Israeli dates. And the reason why we did this is because it's known, like you said, that the vast majority of Israeli dates are grown in the Jordan Valley, and they are exploiting stolen Palestinian land, as well as exploiting Palestinian labor to ensure that their product is cultivated and picked and sent and exported to the rest of the world. The United States is not the largest consumer of Israeli dates. I think Europe is, but the United States is still a significant market for Israeli dates. And so for us to take a strong stand, we needed to make sure that our community was well aware of what was happening on the ground in Palestine, but also well aware of what they're putting in their mouths and ultimately breaking their own fast on. So we started a campaign to make a date this Ramadan, not to break our fast on apartheid dates. It defeats the whole purpose of fasting if we are breaking our fast with dates that are grown on stolen land and exploiting Palestinian labor, etc. This is something that we need to make sure that we are not allowing our community to do, and ensure that people are aware of what's going on. So we launched this campaign in 2012 with the help of many groups and allies around the country. And essentially what we did is we highlighted the companies that we were aware of that are branded or exported to the United States. And among them are Hadiklaim, Carmel, Agrexco, Jordan River Biotops, King Solomon, among Mehadrin, among others. And so we wanted to ensure that people are looking at the labels, looking at the companies that they're buying, and making sure that that we're actually spending money on dates that are grown around the Muslim world. Actually, Tunisia and Algeria and Pakistan actually now recently has become one of the larger exporters of dates to the United States. So why not buy from those countries? Obviously, many people like to buy Medina dates, the Saudi dates, as well as the United States has a growing and very important domestic date production in California and in Arizona. And so we're encouraging folks to buy California-grown dates. One of the companies that we're working with is Orchid Dates out of the Coachella Valley in California, and they provide a superb Medjool date options for consumption. And so that's sort of how the campaign has evolved over the years. Alhamdulillah, we've seen, we're looking at the raw data and numbers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They have an economic research service that allows us to track and quantify our results. And since 2015, Israel used to export about 23 million pounds of dates to the United States. In 2019, they only exported 7 million pounds of dates to the United States. So there's a drastic decrease. Israel used to be the #2 exporter of dates to the United States. Now it has dropped down under Tunisia, Algeria, and Pakistan could potentially even take over the #3 spot if things continue in this trajectory. So that's a very good thing. We're helping Muslim countries, grow their industries and grow their market share here in the United States, while also taking Israel to account for its apartheid policies and occupation that it's putting the Palestinians under.
That's excellent. So what are some of the things, how people can get involved with this? Like for example, I wanted to ask, number one, has there been outreach directly to halal grocery stores who sometimes carry these dates without even knowing where they're coming from or who these particular brands are? So could you talk about a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the cool things about this campaign is not only are we putting out information, but our local chapters across the country are actually going to stores and talking to halal store owners and Muslim and Arab-owned store owners, grocery store chains, etc., telling them about our campaign and getting their commitment. And maybe I could share some videos with you guys later on about some stores in New Jersey who have on video committed to boycotting Israeli dates and de-shelving those dates if they already have them on the shelves. So alhamdulillah, we've had some great success in that regard. I've been personally visiting some of the DMV area stores here over the past few weeks. Alhamdulillah, I actually haven't seen Israeli dates, very few over the past year being sold here, especially in Northern Virginia. I'm not sure how the case is in Maryland, but in Northern Virginia, I've seen a lot of stores actually refuse to hold those dates and are selling much more California as well as Tunisian, Algerian, and Saudi dates in their stores. So alhamdulillah, it's had a great reception in the community so far.
That is excellent. That's really great to hear. And this is something that people can actively do. This is, a lot of times folks at home don't know how can they help, and when organizations like yours give them clear-cut directions, let them know how they themselves can do like these small things, but that add up to this large change that can come and put pressure. So I really, really, I'm really grateful. So how did this, is there a hashtag sort of like people, if they find a date somewhere, what can they do? Like suppose I walk into a halal grocery store and I do find these dates. Do you guys, what would you suggest for them to do when they talk to the store owners? And if they do find it, is there a way they can get in touch with you in an easy way and let you know that, hey, we found some Israeli dates here?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. As a matter of fact, on our website, we have an entire project page dedicated to this, and you could actually see that we have on there a whole section about how to approach businesses, about taking a pledge to boycott Israeli dates. And so if you go on ampalestine.org/projects/dates, you will see there's a downloadable template of a letter that you could download and take to your local halal store that you could inform them of what's going on. And then you could also sign our petition or our pledge to join the boycott of Israeli dates. And then you could also see that we have posters that you could also download. A poster that you could take and you could ask your local store owner or your mosque. Obviously, not a lot of people are attending the mosque right now, but something you could share on social media and as well as through your own contacts and WhatsApp groups, etc., to inform the community about the dates and which companies to boycott. So all the resources are available for you on our website, ampalestine.org/projects/dates, and you will be able to see all the information available to you.
And this is something that, as advocates, we know how important this is. These boycotts work. And this is something, when people say, "Oh, what good will it do?" We know when we started the Fast from China campaign, it seemed so enormous because everything was made in China. Like, how do you, But even within that small frame of time, and from just Muslim companies pledging to remove themselves from purchasing things or making purchases, large wholesale orders from, it really has an effect when and always, obviously, this is spiritual activism too, right?
Absolutely.
There's a barakah that comes into your business when you're not using oppressed people's labor just so to open your fast with or to decorate your home with. We believe that as Muslims that all of this work is where this is ibadah too, right? This sort of boycotting is. So let's talk a little bit about the broader BDS campaign. What are the challenges currently, and what are some of the wins?
Yeah, absolutely. On an international level, BDS has made some significant gains. I mean, to the point where we're talking about national pension funds withdrawing their investments from companies profiting from the occupation, or withdrawing their investments from Israeli banks, for example. For example, in Norway, the largest national pension fund in the world, worth about $1 trillion. Imagine that they divested from Israeli companies and companies profiting from the occupation. This is a huge win for us. Similarly, in other countries, the same thing has happened. We're talking about companies that are multinational corporations, companies that have their tentacles all over the world, are struggling because of the boycott campaigns that our efforts have put forth. And in the United States, similarly, we've had major successes. We have major church organizations. The churches in the United States operate a little bit different than mosques. They're more like a corporatized structure. They have centralized committees that control the investments of the church organizations. And we've seen numerous church organizations support divestment efforts where they're withdrawing their church's investments from companies that are profiting from the occupation, American companies and Israeli. Both. And so, even from among the Muslim community institutions, Amana Mutual Fund, one of the biggest Muslim investment firms in the United States and globally, worth billions of dollars, they actually divested their money from a company called United Technologies because that company was producing a technology that was being used by the Israeli military, even though it was a small section of their portfolio. But they decided to take a principled stand and divest. So these things are having a major impact. And the reason why we know they're having a major impact, not just because of the sheer number that we're talking about. We know Israel's response is an indicator of how impactful these things are. Israel has responded very viciously to the boycott campaigns and efforts. They have assigned essentially a ministry of the government to focus on combating BDS, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. And they have a lot of former military and intelligence officials working in that ministry to combat BDS and globally, and especially here in the United States.
Yes,
the United States.
I know in my state, Maryland, as much as Senator Cardin is great on Burma, he's been one of the main pushers of this bill that criminalizes to be a part of BDS. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so let's talk a little.
Yeah, so you know we're dealing with a two-pronged threat here in the United States as people working for justice in Palestine. Number one, you have the opposition, the Zionist lobby, the pro-Israel lobby, working with the different groups and organizations that they're a part of to silence us, to blacklist our activists online, and to intimidate people working for Palestine. And then through also their efforts, they're working from a sort of a top-down approach. They don't have the grassroots depth that we do, especially on university campuses. So what they're doing is essentially trying to institutionalize a criminalization of criticism of Israel by changing the definition of anti-Semitism to include criticism of Israel.
Exactly.
And essentially, this is what the Trump administration did with the recent executive order, as well as what Congress has passed, essentially limiting criticism, or excuse me, limiting engagement with boycotts of Israel. And this is what you were referring to when it comes to Senator Cardin, who introduced the anti-BDS bill in the Senate himself. And I actually had a meeting with Senator Cardin to discuss this particular bill, and where he tried to act like he didn't know that the bill would punish people's First Amendment rights to criticize Israel or to participate in a First Amendment protected boycott, which it is First Amendment protected. The United States historically has engaged in boycotts and leveraged boycotts to make significant gains for oppressed people, particularly in the civil rights movement. The Montgomery bus boycott is a prime example of that. So it's something that's part of America. The Boston Tea Party is another prime example of people boycotting goods in order to achieve some political gain. And so this is part of American culture and part of American political life. And so in order to protect Israel, Senator Cardin has essentially curtailed the rights of American citizens at the expense. The American citizens are paying the price essentially with their own rights to protect the state of Israel. This is absolutely unacceptable. This is why we rejected this. But these are some of the challenges that we're dealing with as Palestine solidarity movement here in the United States, as people working for justice in Palestine. That you have the number one, the Zionist lobby, and number two, the top-down government repression of people working for Palestine in the United States.
Exactly. So because a lot of times we don't celebrate the wins, and a lot of times people don't even realize the wins. I wanted to read down a list of a few things that have happened for BDS wins from the U.S. campaign for Palestinian rights. So, for example, and this is for my audience, in SodaStream moved this factory out of Palestine's West Bank in 2014.
That's right.
Veolia divested completely from the Israeli market. Ahava announced factory relocation outside of occupied West Bank. G4S announced plans to leave Israel. And then in 2016, following years of BDS campaigns, G4S ends most illegal businesses in Israel and sells most of their Israeli businesses. Then there are academic boycotts. There's cultural boycotts where, for example, Black Lives Matter endorsed BDS. Pulitzer Prize winning and MacArthur Genius Award recipient Junot Diaz endorsed BDS.
That's right.
There are many rappers and novelists, rock bands. Mira Nair boycotted Haifa Film Festival. So, and then we can move on to, like you were talking about, faith-based actions. The Episcopal Church voted to divest from Israel's human rights because of Israel's human rights abuses in 2018. In 2018, Presbyterian Church of the U.S. Defended the right to boycott votes for repeal of anti-BDS measures. And so I really urge folks who sometimes have this view that what can one person do, or what can one, a few people do. When a few people collectively get together, a lot can happen. Just like you were talking about, we went after the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation a lot.
That's right.
Because of their coziness with Prime Minister Modi, but because of BDS and because of and the pressure, in 2014, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation divested from G4S, and that led to G4S leaving Israel, right? So when you start going after, then in the same thing I found. So one of the things that it seems to be really working is getting investment funds to divest first. So like how Soros divested from the Soros Fund Management divested from SodaStream, which made SodaStream pull out, right? So
Exactly.
that seems to be a tactic that is working well. And what are some of your other favorite wins?
Um, I would say you mentioned Veolia. I think was a major win. The reason for that is because Veolia is such a huge company. They're a French conglomerate. They handle waste management. They do transportation. They do all sorts of things. And we launched a big campaign against them in Los Angeles. I remember when I was there, to get the city council to reject a contract that they were trying to give them to manage the LA bus system. And Veolia sent a representative from Paris to Los Angeles to respond to our campaign, and that's how seriously they took this. And after so many years of losing contracts around the world, Veolia, which was building a light rail train system in Jerusalem for Israeli settlers, basically withdrew from their contract because, or announced that they're no longer taking any more contracts in Israel because of this boycott campaign that cost them billions of dollars in contracts globally. And for me, that is just an example of how people power can win, can make companies and people in power, capitulate to our demands. And I think what you said is really important here. That even the biggest companies like Microsoft and G4S will have to hear the consumer at the end of the day, because money is where it hurts, and if they're seeing negative results in their profit margins and their market share, then they're absolutely going to heed the demands of the people, especially when we have righteous indignation in our pursuit of justice. And so this is one of the I think the biggest wins that we've had over the past 10 years. Just last year we had a campaign to push Airbnb to reject listing units in Israeli settlements. So Israeli settlers were actually listing their settlement apartments and homes on Airbnb. And the reason why we pushed Airbnb to delist those settlements is because obviously settlements are illegal according to international law. And number two is, if a Palestinian wanted to rent that apartment home in the settlement using Airbnb, he would not be able to, because of the apartheid system in the West Bank. And so Airbnb was essentially tacitly approving of this by allowing Israeli settlers to be engaged, to use their platform to put their units online. And so we sent a letter to Airbnb. We launched a massive national campaign against Airbnb, and they folded. They actually decided to delist units on Israeli settlements. However, under a lot of pressure and lawsuits from the Israeli government, Airbnb decided to relist those settlement units, and it continues to do so now. And so that's why we are calling for a national boycott of Airbnb, an international boycott of Airbnb, until they actually respect the human rights of Palestinians and delist those settlement units. And so this is another example of a campaign that could be successful, but also can go back and regress, unfortunately, because of the counter pressure that is being applied.
SubhanAllah, this is it really like builds, right? So one of the positive changes I wanted to talk about, this is one of my favorite wins in the recent years, was even though it ended up being that she was not able to take this delegation to Palestine, Rashida Tlaib's plan, like when rejecting the Israeli lobby's influence over Congress and putting that delegation together where the incoming members of Congress would be able to to go visit Palestine. So this was something that usually, there's a decades-old tradition of newly elected members are sent to what is known as Israel, and on a junket sponsored by the education arm of IPAC. And And so Rashida refused to be, because as an incoming new member of Congress refused to, and she said, "I'm going to take my own." So just that, like having, I'm just thinking back 20 years when I was in college, or we would have never even imagined that there would be this discussion, So these are that whole the way Palestine is being discussed in this country has changed.
Absolutely.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, the coalition building. For me, it has been, and I always look towards that for as hope, number one, and it's also as a method that other movements can adopt, is when Jewish people themselves and Jewish youth themselves have taken it upon themselves to fight this oppression. That is when those winds change. So we talk about positive coalition building with the Jewish community, and how strong is that?
It is extremely strong, and actually, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland Brookings polls show clearly, as well as Pew Research polls, show clearly that over the past 10 years, public opinion on Israel-Palestine has shifted dramatically in the favor of Palestinians and Palestinian human rights. I think people in general are understanding that there are many pieces at play here, and that the most drastic shift actually of opinion on this issue has come from within the Jewish community, and that's so very interesting to look at. That so many people within the Jewish community feel that Israel is misusing their name. They have this disenfranchisement with the way Israel is handling itself and it's doing things, and so they are moving more towards a position of supporting Palestinian human rights, and that's, I think, a very crucial moment. One of the major indicators for me that things have shifted from a public opinion standpoint on Palestine are the way that politicians react to certain things. And you brought up the example of Rashida Tlaib leading her own delegation, and that's one major indicator that things have shifted. For the longest time, Israel was always a bipartisan consensus issue. What that means is that both Democrats and Republicans always supported the state of Israel, and that was not even questioned. That was something that nobody would question. It was something that was sort of common knowledge, essentially, that the pro-Israel position is the position, sort of standard position of the U.S. Congress, and many people who are running for president and would attend the AIPAC conference and declare essentially their allegiance to the U.S.-Israel relationship. And what's interesting is that over the past 4 years, especially with the rise of Bernie Sanders coming onto the political scene, we've seen that openly criticizing Israel's policies, calling for Palestinian human rights, is no longer political suicide for politicians, and it's making more people have an emboldened stand in support of Palestinian human rights. We're talking about, we're not just talking about Rashida here and Ilhan Omar. We're talking about the Debbie Dingles of the world. We're talking about the Betty McCollums of the world, the Ro Khannas of the world, that now members of Congress who weren't traditionally the open spoken voices for Palestine, but are there now, and they're, the Mark Pokans of the world. They're standing in support of Palestinian human rights, and they're standing in opposition to the Israel lobby and refuse to take money from the Israel lobby. So this is actually a major shift that we've seen, that over the past 4 years, something that was, like you said, unimaginable 20 years ago when we were organizing, that we would be able to reach the halls of power and be able to impact and influence their decision-making and their input on this issue.
Definitely. And this is, so there's a question actually I wanted to pick up on the stream that someone is asking. So Farhana Mutala, just an awesome advocate for Palestine as well. So she's asking, what does AMP do to influence people against taking birthright trips with faith washing groups like the Muslim Leadership Initiative?
That's a very good question. As a matter of fact, one of the AMP's key initiatives has been to counter things such as the Muslim Leadership Initiative, which is a Zionist-led initiative, essentially designed to brainwash Muslims and to believing that Zionism is something essential to the Jewish faith, and that Israel's existence is essential to the Jewish faith, and therefore the Muslim community should cease opposing the state of Israel in the way it does. And we've seen, unfortunately, numerous amounts of cohorts sent from the United States of quote-unquote Muslim leaders or Muslim influencers, culture creators, people who maybe have a certain status in society, being taken to Israel on this junket and essentially taught about Zionism and what it means to Israel and Jewish people. And so we've taken a very strong position against this. Number one, it basically feeds into this idea that American Muslims and Muslims in general have this anti-Semitism problem that they need to deal with, that needs to be dealt with, and that the Jewish community needs to teach us how to properly talk about Jews, and that there's this historic conflict between Muslims and Jews that goes back thousands of years, that we only can fix here in the United States as American Muslims and American Jews. This is an absolutely false premise, and it's a myth that Muslims and Jews have been at historic odds for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, the opposite is true. We all know that from learning and reading really our Muslim history. And so when we engage in these types of initiatives, we're basically feeding into this false narrative. And making ourselves seem like the saviors, whether we're the Muslims or the Jewish community. People in the Muslim and Jewish community both have the same problem, in the sense that we think that we're going to be the saviors of the Muslim Ummah by engaging in this type of work. Interfaith work is not wrong to engage in. As a matter of fact, we encourage interfaith work, but interfaith work based on principles of justice and freedom are what we support. Not interfaith work that seems to that seeks to essentially eliminate any discussion about Palestinian human rights. It seeks to essentially quash any opposition to Israel within the Muslim community, and this is something that's happening on a national level, unfortunately, even especially in certain parts of the country, like Houston and in the DMV area, as well as parts of the Midwest. Unfortunately, and this is something that we're trying to mitigate and deal with on a regular basis, informing our Muslim community that while we understand that while we're under threat, here in the United States as a minority community, while we're dealing with this administration that seems hell-bent on turning everything upside down for our community, that we do not fall in the lap of people who do not have our interests at heart, who may seem to be benign in their approach to us, who may stand in front of our mosques and holding signs, that they're against Islamophobia and against anti-Muslim bigotry, but on the other hand, support legislation that surveils Muslims, or on the other hand, honor people who are Islamophobes in their dinners and galas and their events. This is something that we've been seeing. There's a huge contradiction in these things, and we highly encourage our community to look out for that. We actually have resources on our website about that as well. We have a whole page about faith washing, what we call faith washing and normalization on our website that you could look up for resources. We've issued entire reports on this subject, and we've written tremendously about this. I've actually written publicly about this, and there's articles that I can share with you as well, so you can share with your audience.
So I'm going to ask you a difficult question. So for example, there have been so one of our campaigns, as you know, is the Save Uyghur campaign, and which is about the Uyghur cause and the absolute, physical, cultural genocide that is taking place in East Turkestan. So, and often at times, because the Jewish community has gone through a genocide themselves, and even for the Rohingya cause, they will come out in support. Right? They will even at sometimes at places where the MSAs will not come out to support. For example, in I shouldn't say the name of this university, but in New York, there was a university that was hosting a Save Uyghur event, and the only faith-based groups that came out in support was Hillel. How do we balance this? Like, how do we? And this is coming from a place that just walking on the straight and narrow. I believe that is not just you have to be principled in your engagement, whether it is in business, whether it is in advocacy, whether it's in activism. This is something that we have to, like the Sirat al-Mustaqim is for everything, right?
Absolutely.
So what are suggestions that you have for people when they engage with organizations for causes other than Palestine, knowing that those people are also Palestinian supporters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a very, very important thing because we saw this happening with the situation in Syria, where, for example, members of the Syrian community who were working very hard to alleviate the plight of Syrian refugees globally were taking support and endorsement from major Zionist organizations in this country, and sort of not kind of seeing that while there may be some benefit on a humanitarian level for the Syrian refugees, that there were some political calculations that the Zionist groups were making in supporting this and trying to also utilize this opportunity to fragment the Muslim community on Israel, and it worked to a certain degree, unfortunately. This is something that we have to be made aware of. How could you, on one hand, stand against the genocide of Uyghurs in China, and on the other hand, support the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, Muslims? So you are against ethnic cleansing of Muslims in one area, but you're supporting the ethnic cleansing of Muslims in another. This doesn't make sense. There's a contradiction here, and I think as Muslim community organizations, we kind of have to make our position very clear. From the outset. This is where we stand on this issue. In order for you to be a true ally, this is where we need you to stand on this issue. And sometimes you'll see that this is a litmus. Palestine ultimately remains the litmus for issues globally. Despite everything that is happening in the world and the tragedies that are occurring, Palestine remains the flagship foreign policy issue of the Muslim community because of the interconnectedness that it has to so many other things. So, for example, Israel, while pro-Israel groups in the United States might support initiatives against the ethnic cleansing of the Uyghurs. On the other hand, Israel is working with China on enhancing their surveillance capacities, and so it's kind of like this.
Exactly.
Like you were.
Burma, the
Right.
Israeli companies are supplying the Burmese army with the weapons that are being used to kill. And in India right now,
India especially is a big example of that. India is the largest purchaser of Israeli arms in the world. India uses Israel's tactics in enhancing their occupation of Kashmir. This is well-known, documented fact that everybody knows this, and yet you have people who might criticize us for calling out certain organizations and groups that are doing work with pro-Israel groups and Jewish organizations that are clearly and openly pro-Israel. So we need to be. I think we need to set the terms ourselves. Yes, we're in a position where we need help to elevate and amplify the voices of those who are helpless. And who are most need. However, we also, like you said, have to take a principled position, and make it known that this is what we stand for. And I think that's really important, especially since the name of the organization is Justice for All, and Justice for All means justice for all without exception. And I think that's very, very crucial to the mission of the organization.
Exactly. And also, all our liberation is tied together, right? So unless
Absolutely.
you cannot have liberate one group of Muslims, and while at the expense of another group of Muslims. So again, like we were talking about spiritual activism, all of this, sometimes we forget that there's a level of what we aim to do, and then what happens from above, right? What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses and not. So when the ummah is together and fighting together on these causes, that then all these systems of oppression, because they are that same system, is essentially, if you look at it from, and maybe I'm sort of diverting from the topic, but this fascinates me always. It is a Dajjali system, and that Dajjali system, and they're all connected. Oppressors. I sometimes joke about this. There's all these oppressors on WhatsApp group, and they're better organized than all of us, and they let each other know, I'm going to go forward with this.
They definitely coordinate. They definitely work together. And like you said, I mean, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said it once, and I think people use it sometimes as a slogan, but they don't really understand what it means. He said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And because if you let injustice fester in any part of the world, that means it could multiply, it could exponentially grow. And this is what we've seen happening. The fact that the occupation of Palestine has lasted this long has caused the catastrophe in Syria, has caused the catastrophe in Iraq, has caused the catastrophe in Libya, has allowed for the catastrophe and the tragedy to happen in Yemen. And now we're seeing how this has manifested itself in Kashmir, in China with the Uyghurs, and in Myanmar with the Rohingyas. And so this is something that, if we don't attack the root causes of the problems immediately, then injustice will fester and will continue to grow. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us clearly, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. That this is our role as a Muslim ummah, to enjoin what is right and forbid what is evil, and believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we're not being the agents of truth and justice, then who is? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace us, and we don't want to be replaced. We want to be the ones who be blessed with being the ones who are the custodians of righteous and just causes globally. And that's why, naturally, as an organization that stands for Palestine, we were the first to stand against the escalation of occupation in Kashmir. Immediately once we heard the news that the Modi government was changing the laws and increasing the occupation of Kashmir, and then we saw the citizenship laws, etc. We were the ones who were standing in front of the Indian embassy. We were the ones who were helping organize the protest. It's the same thing with the Rohingyas. We were the first organization to lead buses to the Myanmar embassy, and I remember seeing you there alongside so many others from the Burma campaign. This is part of who we are as an organization, part of who we are as Palestinian people, to stand with the oppressed and support those around the world who are looking for support and are trying to gasp for breath, but cannot find it in this international order that continues to serve the interests of imperialism and those in power, and not those of the oppressed and people who are standing for just causes around the world.
Definitely. This is this is a message that I hope is clear to everyone everywhere, because these short-term gains that people may get by compromising those principles of activism, right? In the long run, and this is not to say that not to be intelligent, right? Not to have a strategy, and not to go and to use opportunities that come your way. But if it at the cost of a cause that is another Muslim's cause, right? Because all of these dividers that we have, these are something that we were just talking about earlier in a halaqah that we were in, is that we are all the ummah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? This is one thing that it joins all of us. So to really keep that in mind whenever you're engaging in justice work, sacred activism, spiritual activism. This is a part of learning how to make the decisions on who to make coalitions with, who to work with, and who not to work with. So this has been a fascinating discussion on that. I want to move a little bit beyond the local, we've talked about local activism with the Ramadan boycott. We've talked about BDS, and then we talked about the challenges that particularly in the United States working on the Palestinian cause. What I wanted to, and before I want to move on to some really good news that, from my perspective, that is brewing in the International Criminal Court, and wanted to share this with our audience on Palestine. So the Jersalem Post reports that the ICC prosecutor, and this is one strong woman, her name is Fatou Bensouda. She's the International Criminal Court prosecutor. On Thursday, this is just earlier this morning, doubled down on her position that Palestine is a state, bringing closer alleged war crimes legal battle with Israel. So now remember, only in these courts, in these international courts, why this is important is because and then she's doing a war crimes probe into Israel. And there were objections on the other side that her war crimes probe would harm the peace process. But Ben Sauda was very clear that the process is simply non-functional. And in any event, such an issue would only come up later when the ICC pretrial chamber considers whether the case is consistent with pursuing the interest of justice. Now remember, folks, in ICC, only a state can take another state to court, except if the prosecutor themselves brings a case against a particular country. And this is what happened with our case. Burma Task Force, which is a project of Justice for All, has a case in the ICC for the Rohingya, on behalf of the Rohingya people, because this prosecutor was able to first bring it to pretrial chambers, and then because of her work, we were able to build a case on behalf of the victims of Tola Toli, which is a small village where massacre took place in 2017. So for me and my work, I'm watching this with great interest. The three, now it depends on how the three ICC pretrial chambers rule, judges rule, that now that Ben Sauda has filed her highly influential position, and this will have consequences for Israel on a legal, diplomatic, and public relations level. This is a big win, and I want to celebrate that with a Palestinian activist on this blessed day of Ramadan. All of these things happening are things we would not have imagined years ago. And the world is changing. This is why we urge people never to give up, continue doing the work that they're doing. So, Tahir, I would like to get your reaction to this news, and then and we'll discuss a little bit of what the US's reaction to this has been.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear this news. Although I'll be honest, I'm cautiously optimistic, because we know that there are serious limitations in, like you said, the prosecution of international law, or the execution of international law when it comes to Israel-Palestine. Unfortunately, despite the fact that the International Criminal Court considered, or International Court of Justice, excuse me, in 2004 considered the wall in the West Bank to be illegal, and considers the settlements to be illegal, there have been no real efforts to hold Israel accountable for its actions. And this sort of illustrates the limitations of international law when it comes to Palestine, but also the opportunity. I think this is a major opportunity. I think this is a great step forward, as we see people within the ICC, especially this prosecutor in particular, who has been very vocal, be bold enough to challenge Israel openly. We know the international consensus is overwhelmingly in favor of Palestine and Palestinians. We've seen this on numerous occasions. When anytime Palestine is brought up in the General Assembly, there's an overwhelming majority of support to include Palestine as a state nation, as a member state. And that is why I think the ICC prosecutor said that Palestine is considered a state. And so I think this is something that, for us is a major gain. And I hope and pray that, the ICC is not obstructed by the United States and Israel in its efforts to hold Israel accountable for its crimes. Although I know for a fact that there are efforts to give immunity to Israeli leaders and military generals from crimes committed against Palestinians, and efforts by the United States to actually punish the ICC if they go after Israel. And this is something that's very serious, and it's a serious development if it does happen, because that means ICC as a body would essentially become dysfunctional. And like the prosecutor herself said, there are major problems in protocol and procedure when it comes to dealing with this issue. So inshallah, like I said, cautious optimism.
some of the countries that have filed support. So there were some countries that have filed in support of Palestine, and then there were countries that filed support obviously in support of Israel, mainly, which is something that is Germany is one of the countries that filed legal briefs in support of Israel. And this is most relevant because Germany is one of the largest funders of ICC. Just, I believe, only second to England.
Wow.
Obviously, here locally, the reaction has been that the Trump administration has taken away Ben Sauda's visa for traveling to the US and is threatening other measures, including sanctions against ICC personnel, due to its position on both the Israel case and there's another case on the United Nations for alleged torture. What they say alleged, we know torture of detainees in Afghanistan, and war crimes by under the Bush administration. So this is, um, you know, I, sometimes there does seem to be like, where will these go? And like you were saying, cautious optimism. And I know, but it's like we can't afford to keep regulated. These are sometimes the only tools that people have at that level. And we have seen, for example, in Burma, you saw the ICJ case by Gambia. You saw the result coming in within, like, we were expecting 2-3 years. The result came in 3 months.
That was extraordinary.
It was, and it just takes some people to show that leadership, to show that wisdom, and to just trust in the process and to able to take it forward. I think one amazing, like, and most of these are African countries or citizens of African countries who themselves are lived in such years of dictatorship and oppression, and who are now in these positions of power that they can move forward. So this is, so for me, maybe I'm a little bit older. That's why I've come to that age in my life where when I see something like this, it gives me hope, inshallah, that this is something that perhaps could move forward, and this legal brief can, and it's, if nothing else, it just having this Israel being discussed like this on an international court is something powerful. It's powerful for the
Absolutely.
movement, right? So, alhamdulillah. So, we have. I would like to open it up for questions for those of who are watching, listening. If you have any questions of Tahir on his own advocacy, I wanted to talk to you. We have approximately, about 7 minutes. Tell me how you got involved in advocacy yourself. As a student activist, have you always been involved? Tell me more about growing up Palestinian. I want to focus this on you yourself, Tahir.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I grew up in a Palestinian household that was very involved politically. We are a family of activists. My grandfather was an activist. My father is an activist. My mother is an activist. So alhamdulillah, we've been part of this work since birth, and participating in demonstrations and in actions and writing letters. It's part of our family culture for sure. And I think my main segue into real activism and advocacy, I think, came during college. Probably before that, but really, in the strongest push, in the most assertive way, during college, when I joined my campus chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, and also joined the board of our MSA and Muslim Student Association. And so I was doing this work, simultaneously within the Muslim community and in the Palestine solidarity work. Alhamdulillah, and that's really where I grew politically, intellectually, as an activist and as an individual. And so, yeah, and then I think one of the most formative moments in my growth as an advocate for Palestine was attending a humanitarian aid convoy, or participating in a delegation to Palestine in 2009. We left the United States end of June 2009, to go on a humanitarian aid convoy to Gaza, where we delivered aid to Gaza. And seeing Gaza in the state that it was in, this is immediately after the war on Gaza in 2009. If you recall, right as Obama was being inaugurated, Israel unleashed an onslaught onto Gaza that killed 1,400 people in a span of 3 weeks. And seeing Gaza the way it was, and seeing family members that I haven't seen in Gaza in 15 years, 14 years, for me was a very powerful experience that I think energized me and has led me to where I am today. And so, that personal experience and that eyewitness account, I think for me was very formative.
SubhanAllah. That is amazing. This I know for the past 2 times that I have you all have asked me to go, and it's hard being my husband. This is personal, but my husband doesn't live here. He lives in another state. Single parenting is tough until hopefully, inshallah, 2 more years and he'll be back together with us. So
Inshallah.
then I will be able to leave my children for that amount of time. I have been praying to Allah to give me this opportunity to go visit, and this is it's a responsibility of every Muslim. Like I know a lot of times people think it is. For me, this is a Muslim cause. This is, yes, it's a Palestinian cause. It's first and foremost for the people of Palestine. Um, but it's also a Muslim cause. This is the Beit al-Maqdis, and anybody who decides to try to take that away from this cause
Absolutely.
is harming the cause. This is our haram. It is everybody should go visit if they can, if it's possible. May Allah make it easy
Absolutely.
to visit, for everybody to visit. So those of you who are watching, and when as the pandemic goes down, inshallah, and you have the ability to go visit, please do go. And inshallah, I left. I was going to discuss the effects of COVID on Palestinian refugees, but inshallah, we will be having a panel on that in our Justice in Ramadan conference that is
Very nice.
on May 8th, inshallah. And so there will be a panel and with a Palestinian speaker on that particular topic, and others who are working on refugee crisis. So inshallah, it's a free conference. A lot of times we don't realize how important a part of our deen, fighting for justice, is. This is worship as well, and would really encourage people to come and attend, inshallah. So we're hoping to have some Congress people there, as well as the ambassador of religious freedom, Sam Brown, back there. So hopefully, inshallah, Tahir, we would love to have you.
Would love to join, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Sister Hena. You are a treasure to this community. Anybody who stands so fervently for justice and on causes that most people ignore, unfortunately, appreciate you for all the work that you're doing and this effort that you're putting in. It's not easy. I know how it is, and I'm always there to support you in any way, inshallah.
Inshallah. So Jazakallah khair. I'm going to ask. We have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask anybody else if they have any questions. Farhana has one quick question about how we discussed this earlier on the anti-BDS executive order in the United States. Could you give us in these last 2 minutes, Tahir, some quick action items that we can push out? Boycotting the Israeli dates. What else?
I mean, the biggest antidote to fighting back against government measures to restrict our rights in boycotting Israel is to continue to boycott Israel despite these things. We need to be very, very assertive, very, very strong in our position, despite what the government might be trying to impose on us. And this is very, very crucial. The second thing is we need to hold those people accountable. People like Ben Cardin, the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, needs to be held accountable for instituting such draconian measures, such as this executive order, which I think we thank our brother Saqib Ali, who has filed a lawsuit against the governor in the state of Maryland, challenging this executive order. And we know that the executive order was challenged also, or similar laws were challenged in Arizona, in Texas, in Kansas, And so we're trying our best. If you have a business, or if you are a public employee that is being forced to sign contracts that force you to pledge allegiance to Israel, or to pledge not to boycott Israel, talk to us. There are lawyers, there are organizations prepared to sue the government on your behalf, and this is something that we highly encourage you to do. Our rights are not gained by someone giving them to us, or the benevolence of those in power. Our rights are achieved and gained by might, and by our will to achieve those things. And so this is something that a message that I want to send to everybody, that without fighting, nothing can be achieved. Without fighting, nobody will take us into consideration. And I think this is of absolute importance to the work that we do.
That is excellent advice to stop the show on. When we make these decisions, and when we come out in full force, right, dressed like the way we are, being authentically, unapologetically ourselves, and fight for our rights, this is what makes this system work. And this is something that I keep telling people. You do not have to compromise. You do not have to. Yes, there's flaws in the system as well, but the system was made to lobby. The system was made to protest. The system was made so you could have that right to go in and, as a citizen, demand that right. You have a right to boycott. No one can take that right away from you. And if anybody is trying in your state, in your city, in your, this is something that we have to, as American citizens, fight for this. So thank you so much once again, Tahir, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you. And we will, for those of you, please visit American Muslims for Palestine, support them, support their work. There will be Advocacy Day later on in the year. Inshallah, attend Advocacy Day and be there, be that support. Without supporters and advocates, we need as many people to join this movement, because it's working. It's really working. Alhamdulillah. And for our listeners, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining in every day, 3:00, where we're talking about justice for all now. Assalamu alaikum.